Welcome to Cornerstones. My name is Stephen Martins, and I'm with Dr. Joseph Boot today to discuss Utopia. From politics, to media, to films, to literature, there's been this pervading idea of utopia, a perfect world for humanity. Well, here's a threefold question. What is utopianism? Where did this idea come from? And how do we interpret this from a distinctly Christian worldview?
Well, if we go back to the Garden of God, and we have to as Christians, to look to find the origin of the utopian dream, you go back to Eden, the expulsion from paradise, and man's sense of frustration that the perfect order that he once inhabited in fellowship with God has been lost. And so the temptation, of course, of our first parents to which they succumbed was that they would be as God. They would be able to define good and evil, right from wrong, truth from falsehood for themselves. And the sense of self-realization that they were expecting didn't emerge, and they ended up expelled from the Garden of God. And so immediately you see, I would say, the first utopian vision that you find historically is Babel. So there's an attempt to build a unified order with its top in the heavens, which was a religious symbol really of man's sense of his own divinity, collectively moving as one sort of society, one sense of religious unity, one language, and God frustrates that first utopian project. Perhaps probably the most noted of the utopias is Plato's, or one of the first is Plato's Republic. It's a kind of communistic order, but interestingly enough, it's governed by philosopher kings, a kind of elite who are going to solve the problems of humanity, because you have to have an intellectual elite solving man's problems, and then, in a sense, having a coercive order which realizes man's true freedom. Now, the term utopia itself was coined by, I think, Thomas More in his book Utopia. Some think it was kind of a playful book, but I think his intention was pretty serious. And the idea was, again, that a group of humanistic elite, of which he was one, would be the rulers, the governors of this new social order, this new ideal society, the abolition of private property, all of this. And this would usher in this kind of new kingdom age. And that gave inspiration, I think, to the first modern intellectual, really, was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was absolutely a utopian, a revolutionary in his thinking, totalitarian in his thinking about the state, who gives then rise to all really the revolutions in Europe that follow. Marx, of course, especially Marxist Leninism, but then people like Bertrand Russell, all the modern intellectuals, really the vast majority of them, if they don't believe the gospel, they tend towards this utopian idea that man, humanistic man, can build for himself an ideal world. And so from Bertrand Russell through to today's sort of cultural Marxists, the persistence of the utopian worldview has been there from the very beginning, and their supreme virtue is unity. You have to bring everyone into unity to be made to love each other, and to build this unified world, this unified religious order in that respect.
Utopia seems to want to address or resolve a particular problem. What is the problem that it's seeking to fix?
So the utopian really thinks that the fundamental problem is the chaotic universe in which man finds himself. So they see the universe as fundamentally hostile to human beings. There's a hostile universe out there. And when that's your cosmology, you tend to see sociology, the social order, society, is also hostile. And so with a chaotic environment, man feels threatened that chaos, man's sort of freedom in this chaotic world, is going to jeopardize man's existence. It's going to jeopardize the future of humanity. And so what's required is an elite seizing control of nature. Nature, of course, in this instance, includes man himself. Seize control of nature, and in terms of an ideal, impose that ideal on society, on the world, so that man can realize, this is what some philosophers would call the freedom of necessity, for man to be free from this chaos, there must be a necessary order. And again, you can see echoes of Eden in all of this, where the temptation for man to be as God. You see that the humanist, he wants to arrogate divine qualities to man. So in order to be as God, you need to be omnipotent, because God is omnipotent. You need omniscience, so you need total power and total knowledge. Well, you can't control and shape society and the world in terms of an ideal without total power and without total knowledge. So you have the growth of the surveillance state, and you have the seizure of people's freedoms, you have the loss of freedom, you have the seizure of power in order to bring this kind of reality about. So this is the situation that we're increasingly confronted with actually now in our own cultural moment. A sort of general leveling has to take place to bring about this unity of mankind. And so you have two fundamental problems with this concept of utopia. How do you get everybody to agree to support this new ideal order? How do you make everyone love? And how are you going to enforce this? So you need increasingly totalitarian controls, and you need to reprogram people. Now, there's obstacles to that, and they are primarily the family, which is resistant to a statist totalitarian picture of the world where everything is being leveled, and the church, which continuously brings people's loyalty back to God, denies that this is a chaotic universe and says actually God's in control, his providence governs all things, and that he is the only true source of unity in the midst of diversity. And so you see that the utopian, in solving the problem of chaos as he sees it, in the name of freedom takes away and destroys people's freedom, in the name of justice robs people of justice. And so we saw with Marxist-Leninism in the 20th century in particular, and actually with the utopian project of Nazism, where man is a god and the Superman is going to, the new ideal man is the overman, the Superman. You see the total destruction of life, and it means that actually the result is dystopia.